My lesbian era began when two female cops arrested me. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as I sat in the back of the police car, my mascara-streaked face reflected in the rearview mirror. I had never felt more humiliated, more defeated, more certain that my life was completely falling apart. What I didn't know in that moment, as the two female officers settled into the front seats and the engine rumbled to life, was that this arrest would become the beginning of everything I'd been too afraid to acknowledge about myself. Sometimes the universe has to break you down completely before it can show you who you're really meant to be. My name is Sarah, and 24 hours before that arrest, I had been living what everyone else considered a perfect life. I was engaged to Marcus, a successful architect who looked good on paper and even better in the family photos my mother constantly posted on Facebook. We had a beautiful apartment in the city, matching his and hers BMWs, and a wedding planned for the following spring with 200 guests and a venue that cost more than my annual salary. But as I sat at the upscale bar that Friday night, drowning my third martini and trying to convince myself that the hollow feeling in my chest was just pre-wedding jitters, I knew something was desperately wrong. Marcus had canceled our dinner plans again, something about an important client meeting that couldn't wait. It was the fourth time that month. I told myself I didn't care, that I was independent and didn't need him to validate me. But the truth was seeping through, the cracks of my denial like water through a broken dam. I didn't miss him when he was gone. I felt relieved, and that terrified me more than anything else. The bartender was a woman with short platinum hair and kind eyes, who kept checking on me as the night wore on. She didn't say much, just offered knowing looks that seemed to see right through my expensive engagement ring and designer dress to the confused, suffocating person underneath. When she gently suggested I should probably call a cab, I waved her off with false confidence and stumbled out into the cool night air, my judgment clouded by vodka and years of suppressed feelings I couldn't name. I don't remember getting into my car. I barely remember starting the engine. What I do remember is the flashing blue and red lights in my rearview mirror, the sickening lurch of my stomach as I pulled over, and the absolute certainty that I had just destroyed my carefully constructed life. The two officers who approached my window were women, both tall and professional, and even through my intoxicated haze, I noticed details I shouldn't have been noticing. The way the shorter one's dark eyes held concern rather than judgment, the gentle firmness in the taller one's voice as she asked me to step out of the vehicle, the way my heart raced with something that wasn't just fear when their presence filled the space around me. Officer Rodriguez, the one with the dark eyes, performed the sobriety test while her partner, Officer Chen, documented everything with quiet efficiency. I failed spectacularly, of course. The tears started before they even told me I was under arrest. Ugly sobs that had nothing to do with the DUI and everything to do with the life I'd been forcing myself to live. As Officer Rodriguez read me my rights, her voice steady and professional, I found myself focusing on her words not out of fear but out of a desperate need to anchor myself to something real, something solid in a world that suddenly felt like it was spinning out of control. The ride to the station was silent except for my sniffling and the occasional crackle of the police radio. Officer Chen drove while Officer Rodriguez kept glancing back at me through the partition, her expression unreadable but not unkind. I later learned that they had been partners for 5 years, had seen countless drunk drivers, countless mistakes, countless lives at crossroads, but something about that night felt different. They would tell me months later, when we could laugh about the absurdity of how we'd met. Something about the broken woman in their backseat had struck a chord. At the station, the harsh fluorescent lights felt like an interrogation of their own, exposing every flaw, every lie, every truth I'd been running from. As they processed my paperwork, Officer Rodriguez asked if there was anyone I wanted to call. Marcus, I thought automatically. My fiancé, the man I was supposed to marry, the man I was supposed to love. But when I opened my mouth, what came out instead was, I don't want to call anyone. I don't want anyone to know. I don't want to go back to that life. The words hung in the air like a confession, and for the first time all night, I felt like I could breathe. Officer Chen exchanged a look with Officer Rodriguez, one of those silent conversations that longtime partners have perfected. Then Rodriguez did something unexpected. She pulled up a chair, sat down across from me at the processing desk, and asked if I was okay. Not about the DUI, not about the legal consequences I was facing, but about me. Was I okay? The question cracked something open inside my chest, and suddenly I was talking, words pouring out in a rush about the engagement I didn't want, the life I was living for everyone else, the feeling of drowning while everyone congratulated me on my swimming. I didn't explicitly say I thought I might be gay. I didn't have the courage or the clarity for that yet. But Officer Rodriguez seemed to understand something in my rambling confession, something in the way I described feeling like I was playing a role in someone else's life. She told me that she'd been engaged to a man once too. Years ago, before she accepted who she really was. She told me about the fear, the shame, the absolute terror of disappointing everyone she loved. And then she told me about the freedom that came after, about finding someone who made her feel alive in ways she'd never experienced before, about building a life that was authentically hers. I spent that night in a holding cell, but it was the first time in years I felt like I could see clearly. The alcohol had worn off, but the fog that had been clouding my entire adult life seemed to be lifting too. Officer Chen checked on me several times during the night, bringing me water and making sure I was comfortable. She had a gentle way about her, a quiet strength that felt different from Officer Rodriguez's more direct approach. I found myself looking forward to those check-ins, grateful for the human connection in a place designed to punish and contain. When Marcus finally came to bail me out the next morning, his face was a storm of anger and embarrassment. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked how I could do this to him, how I could jeopardize his reputation, what his parents would think, whether the arrest would show up in background checks for the wedding venue. Officer Rodriguez was the one who processed my release, and as she handed me my personal belongings, she slipped a business card into my hand. On the back, she'd written the name and number of a therapist who specialized in helping people navigate questions of sexual identity and orientation. "It's okay to take your time figuring things out," she said quietly. "But don't spend your whole life living for everyone else's approval." The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I attended my mandatory DUI classes and court appearances, but the legal consequences felt minor compared to the internal revolution happening inside me. I started seeing the therapist whose name Officer Rodriguez had written down. I began journaling, reading stories from other women who had come out later in life, allowing myself to acknowledge attractions and feelings I'd been suppressing since middle school. Marcus and I had explosive arguments that always ended the same way, with him insisting I was going through a phase and me feeling increasingly certain that the phase had actually been our entire relationship. Breaking off the engagement was agonizing. My mother cried. My father didn't speak to me for weeks. Friends took sides, and I lost some people I thought would be in my life forever. But I also felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying someone else's heavy coat and finally had permission to take it off. Through it all, I kept thinking about Officer Rodriguez's eyes, the understanding in them, the implicit promise that there was a life on the other side of this pain, where I could finally be myself. 3 months after my arrest, I ran into Officer Rodriguez at a coffee shop downtown. She was off duty, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket, holding hands with a beautiful woman I assumed was her girlfriend. My heart did something complicated in my chest, a mixture of recognition and longing and gratitude. We talked for a few minutes, awkward at first, but then warming with genuine connection. She introduced her girlfriend, asked how I was doing, seemed genuinely pleased to hear that I'd broken off my engagement and started therapy. Before we parted ways, she invited me to a LGBTQ community group that met monthly at a local community center. "It's just people figuring things out," she said. "No pressure, no judgment, just honesty." I went to that first meeting terrified and left feeling seen in a way I never had before. Officer Chen was there too, which surprised me until I learned that she and Officer Rodriguez weren't just work partners, but part of the same chosen family of queer women who supported each other through coming out, relationships and everything in between. Listening to their stories, the stories of women who had found themselves after years of hiding, I felt something I'd been missing my entire life. I felt like I belonged somewhere. Over the next several months, those meetings became my anchor. I made friends who understood the complicated journey of late-blooming queerness, who didn't judge me for the years I'd spent in denial, who celebrated every small step I took toward authenticity. I went on my first date with a woman at 26 years old, and even though it was awkward and didn't lead anywhere romantic, I felt more present and alive during those 2 hours than I had during my entire relationship with Marcus. I started dressing differently, not dramatically, but more like myself, whoever that was turning out to be. I cut my hair short and loved the way it made me feel powerful and free. If this story has touched your heart, if you've ever felt trapped in a life that didn't fit or struggled with accepting your true self, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who might desperately need to hear them, who might be sitting in their own metaphorical back of a police car, waiting for permission to become who they really are. Share this with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to start living authentically. You never know whose life you might change with a simple act of sharing. Officer Rodriguez became a friend, a mentor, and eventually one of my closest confidants. She and Officer Chen, who I learned had been together for 3 years, showed me what healthy love looked like between women. Not the sanitized, performative version I'd seen in media, but the real complicated, beautiful everyday version that involved arguing about whose turn it was to do dishes and slow, dancing in the kitchen and building a life together despite a world that didn't always make it easy. They taught me that coming out wasn't a single moment but a continuous choice to be honest with yourself first and then with everyone else. A year after my arrest, I went back to that same police station, but this time I walked in freely with a cake I'd baked myself. It was Officer Rodriguez's birthday, and I wanted to thank her properly for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for giving me that therapist number, for showing me that there was life on the other side of fear. We sat in the break room together, her, Officer Chen, and a few other officers who'd become familiar faces through my community group connections. And I realized something profound. This place that had represented rock bottom, the absolute lowest point of my old life, had actually been the launch pad for my new one. My relationship with my parents slowly healed, though it would never be what it was before. Some bridges once burned can only be rebuilt as different structures entirely. My mother still struggled with accepting my sexuality, but she was trying, and I had learned that trying was enough for now. My father surprised me by being more accepting than I'd expected, telling me one afternoon over coffee that he just wanted me to be happy, and he'd never really seen me happy with Marcus anyway. I eventually started dating someone seriously, a woman named Alex who worked as a high school teacher and had the kindest smile I'd ever seen. Our first kiss felt like coming home, like finally understanding what all those love songs had been talking about. When I told Officer Rodriguez about Alex, she smiled with the knowing look of someone who'd watched a caterpillar become a butterfly and wasn't at all surprised by the transformation. She and Officer Chen double-dated with us a few times, and the four of us became unlikely friends, brought together by the strange circumstances of that night that changed everything. Looking back now, I can see how every painful moment was necessary. The suffocating engagement, the reckless decision to drive drunk, the humiliation of arrest, the terrifying process of coming out, the loss of people I thought would always accept me. All of it was part of the journey from who I was pretending to be to who I actually am. I don't recommend getting arrested as a path to self-discovery. I'd tell people later when I started sharing my story more publicly. But sometimes the universe has to hit you over the head to get your attention. The DUI was expunged from my record after I completed all my classes and community service, but I wouldn't erase that night if I could. That arrest saved my life in a way that had nothing to do with preventing a potential accident. It saved me from a lifetime of living as someone else, from waking up at 50 in a marriage that felt like a prison, from never knowing what it felt like to be touched by someone who made every nerve ending sing with recognition and desire. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something. If you've made it this far, if Sarah's journey has resonated with you in any way, please leave a comment below sharing just one word that describes how this story made you feel. Just one word. I read every single comment, and your words matter more than you know. They create a community of understanding and support for others who are struggling. Today I live in a small apartment decorated exactly how I want it, full of plants and books and photographs of chosen family. I work at a non-profit organization that supports LGBTQ youth, helping young people avoid some of the years of denial and pain I went through. Alex and I are talking about moving in together, taking that next step with a certainty and excitement I never felt with Marcus. And sometimes when I'm having a particularly good day, I think about that terrified woman in the back of the police car, mascara running down her face, convinced her life was over. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything was about to begin. I wish I could tell her that the two female cops who arrested her would become unexpected catalyst for the most important transformation of her life. I wish I could tell her that rock bottom was actually solid ground, the foundation from which she would finally build something real. But maybe she wouldn't have believed me anyway. Maybe some things you have to discover for yourself, in your own time, in the back of a police car or wherever your personal awakening finds you. Maybe the most important journeys are the ones that begin when we think everything is ending. My lesbian era didn't just begin that night. My real life began, and every day since has been a gift of authenticity. I never thought I deserved, but am learning to embrace completely. If you're reading this and feeling trapped in a life that doesn't fit, please know that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to become who you were always meant to be.